I know it's kind of weird for a book reviewer to do a game suggestion list, but you know what? Whatever works. So I am a huge consumer of audiobooks, and their utility is pretty obvious. You can listen to them in the car, when you're doing chores, making dinner, whatever, your audiobook has your back. Except they're not really that good for when you just want to, chill out and read. If I were to just sit on the couch and listen to my audiobook, I will fall asleep, inevitably, every single time. So I need some sort of attention focus when I'm listening to them. And the obvious solution is games. So today I want to share some of my favorite audiobook games with you guys, and especially if you're audiobook listeners, I hope this will give you just a few more options for when you listen to your books. I have a number of genres represented here, so there should be a lot for everyone. The only big thing is you're not going to see many big story-based games on this list, and that's because if anything has a story that you need to focus on, of course you can't focus on your book. So that's going to be the big omission, but everything else, lots of genres, lots of variants here, so hopefully there should be something that you'll enjoy. Let's start it off with the roguelikes. This is personally my favorite genre for playing games with audiobooks. There's just something really satisfying where roguelikes tend to engage like the action-responsive part of your brain, where like the logical thinking part of your brain is engaged with the book at the same time. They just synthesize really well for me personally. The first roguelike, and probably the best one in my opinion that I recommend, is Enter the Gungeon. Enter the Gungeon is kind of the pinnacle of the top-down shooter roguelike genre, in my opinion. It just has excellent progression, excellent random surprises and things you can stumble upon. In the real words of Marie Kondo, this game would spark joy, in my opinion. It's really good at those, pleasant, interesting surprises that keep you engaged, even if you've played, hundreds of rounds. Next one is Hades. This is Supergiant's new roguelike game. It's still in early access, but I think the 1.0 release is coming out really soon, so it qualifies. This is, as you'd probably guess from the name, a Greek-inspired roguelike where you play as the son of Hades trying to escape the underworld. The art here is magnificent. The gameplay and combat really does play like a Supergiant game. They have their kind of isometric control scheme that goes on. Feels really similar. But the roguelike progression is a lot of fun. The power-ups that you get and the different weapons that they have play really differently. So there's still a lot of ingenuity and replay value. Next up is Nuclear Throne. It's in the same class of Gungeon where it's in a top-down shooter, but it's a bit earlier, and I think in some ways it served as an inspiration for Gungeon. I love Nuclear Throne. It's one of my favorites. The art isn't quite as fine, but it has a lot of fun secrets, and it takes the difficulty level up. It's one of those, this is a rather hard game sort of games, and I really enjoyed the challenge posed by that. There are also some pretty good side-scroller roguelikes that I like. Rogue Legacy is a lot of fun. You are a knight sort of person entering a haunted castle, and as you run around there and inevitably eventually die, the next person you play in the next round is that original character's child, and that's kind of how you do the different classes is, when your person you're just playing dies, then you have a pick between their children, and then, they have a few different classes, and it's whimsical, it's fun, the upgrade progression is enjoyable. The last roguelike is Risk of Rain, and Risk of Rain is kind of unique among these. It's very power-up focused, so you can stack and get a ton of passive power-ups, and it can make the gameplay really fun. There isn't too much that's carried over from game to game except character unlocks and item unlocks, but you're not going to be, really having a large upgrade pathway like something like Rogue Legacy would have, for example. But it's excellent. It kind of has that space alien vibe. Oh yeah, and the big thing about it is the longer you take, the higher the difficulty gets. So it'll start out fairly easy, but especially if you linger around the level, enemies that are just harder and harder keep spawning, and that dynamic is really good for adding a bit of tension and strategizing as you're exploring these maps. It just adds a nice element to the gameplay. Next up is platformers. So these things pair in a very similar way that roguelikes do. There's that action and timing logic in part of your brain, while another part can kind of happily focus on the book while still having something to do. And the first one I want to talk about is Celeste. Celeste is probably the first big platformer in a long time, but it is a really well executed one, and it's also very difficult. So if you maybe want to start off with something easier, Celeste isn't quite that forgiving. In that case, I'd recommend something like maybe the original Marios, like Super Mario Bros., something like that, or one of the thousands of indie platformers. There's one I played kind of recently called VVVVV. Any of these pairs really well with audiobooks. All right, next up, if you're like, I don't really feel the action, I want something a bit more relaxed, I got you. Chill games. These are things like Stardew Valley, where you're running a farm and you have to manage certain resources and grow crops, and it takes a bit of planning, which I find like when I need to think too much or like strategize too much, it can interfere with my books. But these are low-key enough that they don't really get in the way. And Stardew Valley is a very excellent example of that sort of chill, slight resource management, interact with some characters, collect the things, make the goods, whatever. Just really soothing, chill game. You can spend so much time in it. After that is, of course, it took over the world for a few weeks back in March, Animal Crossing. I get burnt out on Animal Crossing really fast, but man, were those 2 weeks intense. So yeah, it might be a good pick for you. If you're like a big Animal Crossing fan, I'm sure you already listen to them, because they just pair super well. All right, so back away from the chill stuff and back to the really hard stuff. If you're like, man, I like platformers and I like roguelikes, but they're not enough for me, Boss Rush. I got you. And the Boss Rush giant, or it's not even really a rush, it's just fight bosses. The Boss Rush giant that it is, Cuphead, absolutely play Cuphead anyway, even if you're not listening to a book. It's just an excellent game. The 2D animation, of course, made a lot of waves because it is brilliant. It's a really fun game. It definitely is hard, ranks up the difficulty level. And if it's not hard enough for you, you can make it harder for yourself. So don't worry about that. The next one is Hollow Knight. I know Hollow Knight is not a boss rush game, but it has a boss rush DLC mode and like a fight a boss perfectly without taking damage DLC mode that I find pairs very well with audiobooks, surprisingly enough. I've been playing through those and they have a synthesis. Like the audiobooks help you from getting too obscenely angry that you have to stop playing. And the game helps distract you so you can actually focus on the book, as weird as that sounds. And now we get to kind of the more RPG style games, anything grindy. So if you are a big Diablo fan, especially when you're at the end of the Diablo and you're the loot grind, that pairs just so very well with books. There's nothing else you can do. JRPGs, so many JRPGs have that grind, audiobook it up. One that I do it for is Pokemon. There are so many parts of Pokemon where you're just like trekking down a route, doing nothing but encountering wild creatures. Audiobooks. Next up is competitive games. So if you need to be beating another human to complete your gameplay experience, don't worry, I still got you. Some of these, not all of these, don't play like Apex or anything with an audiobook. You won't hear the footsteps, it won't work. But you can definitely play some. Like, I've been playing a lot of Fall Guys recently, like everyone else in the world, but Fall Guys pairs excellently with audiobooks. It has that same platformer timing thing, and you don't really need to hear what's going on, and you don't really need to focus so hard that you can't listen to a book. So that pairs really well. If you're looking for something a bit more serious, Rocket League. Rocket League's a lot of fun. It's car soccer. If you're not familiar with it, it's a very aerial game, and it pairs very well with audiobooks as well. So if you're not really a PC or console gamer, don't worry. I still got games for you. I'm going to talk about some of these classic, like logic puzzle sorts of games, as well as some mobile games that pair really well with audiobooks. The first is Nonograms? I don't know, man. Anyway, it's a really fun logic puzzle. It's a kind of a 2D grid structure where there are numbers on each side of the grid, and they indicate which boxes will be filled in or won't be filled in. It's a lot of fun. Rules take a bit to learn, and when you're learning them, you can't listen to books. But after that, it is just an excellent game to zone out and just fill in these grids. I prefer the 20 by 20 variants, but I know a lot of people like 15 by 15. So, just figure out what you like. Next, of course, is Sudoku. Sudoku needs no introduction nor explanation. It is the king of Bible puzzles. Similarly, crosswords. Easy crosswords go really well with audiobooks. The harder ones sometimes can cause you to think too much and it can interfere with the book, so your mileage may vary a bit on that. This isn't a logic puzzle, but like Tetris compare really well if you're like in the Tetris zone while listening to a book. When it gets up to like, level 15 or 14 or whatever and it's super fast, sometimes it's a bit too much. So just make sure you're watching your levels there. Oh yeah, of course, how could I forget the Windows default game champion, Solitaire. Solitaire pairs excellently just because you're engaging that like mindless moving card part of your brain while you can actually really engage with the books in the back of it. As for mobile games, I know everyone kind of has their favorites, like Candy Crush and Bejeweled, where you're swapping stuff around, really popular. Just kind of check out what's out there. My poison, I guess, is Flow Free, where all these dots on the grid, like pairs of colored dots on this 2D grid, and you have to connect the dots while not crossing any other color. And it can create some pretty interesting puzzles. And they also have variants where there are bridges or like hexagons instead of squares. And it's just a really good like time-wasting mobile game, as they all are, I guess. All right, so yeah, that's my list. I hope this can help bring you some audio joy or some new options that you can pair with your audiobooks. I know it's kind of weird for a book reviewer to do a game suggestion list, but you know what? Whatever works. Talk to you guys later. Bye.